Ready. Play.
Hey guys, so we have arrived at the end of our ATP countdown. I think there was not that much suspense in terms of like which match was gonna top the list. Probably you guys knew there was gonna be this one, but anyway, I'm gonna be chatting about Carlos Alcaraz against Jannik Sinner in Beijing with none other than Carlos Navarro. So, well, yeah, you can see the correlation there. But no, I mean Carlos is obviously a very good friend of the Talking Tennis community, and he's gonna help me kind of unveil this match for you, which is actually a pretty big job for us because, well, it's the number one.
Just like Alcaraz and Sinner are the number one rivalry in ATP Tour right now, So it makes sense. It makes sense to have this as the top of the list, and it was quite a great chapter in the rivalry. And I think it was a match that meant something for Alcaraz because you could see that Sinner was kind of unbeatable in the last stretch of the season. It took something special to dethrone him, and Alcaraz is that special. And I think it's very interesting to break down why he is that special. Especially that last part of the match, Damian, was something to behold, and it really deserves to take the throne in this list of great matches of the season.
Yeah, we started painting that picture already, but like Yannick coming off Cincinnati U.S. Open at the same time Carlos does. I mean, plays like I think he called it like one of the worst matches of his life at Cincinnati. U.S. Open is not that much better. In fact, I would say maybe it's even worse. Of course, he gets some sort of retribution at Davis Cup, at Laver Cup, at all the cups basically. But you can see that he's enjoying himself a bit more. You can see that going into that final against Sinner, he is playing like very aggressively. He beats Medvedev, of course. But what were your expectations going into this match? Considering that Carlos won the two matches that they played beforehand in 2024, but actually it was Jannik, of course, who claimed the Beijing semifinal of 2023.
I think it was very interesting, not only in terms of that kind of revenge aspect that Carlos could have in his mind prior to the match, but because we could see that maybe Carlos had the edge in terms of when you were playing on grass and on clay, livelier courts, which suit the style of Carlos a little bit more than Jannik's. But you could also see that Sinner was becoming kind of the guy to beat on hard courts. So apart from maybe Indian Wells, which kind of has these special characteristics, it's a hard court, but it sometimes plays like a clay court. You could see that Sinner was also like number one pick for most of the experts and guys in every or he's becoming, that number one pick in hardcore tournaments. So for Alcaraz, it was very important to prove to the people that he is also capable of beating Sinner on hard courts. He is that good. He is that consistent when even when he's not consistent, but when he reaches his peak is good enough to let him stay in tough and critical moments of the match, which is kind of what we saw. We'll go analyze that in a bit, but which is kind of what we saw in the second set, And I think it's worth mentioning that Carlos played with a very aggressive mindset during this match. He was risking a lot, especially with his backhand returns. He was taking them on the rise, which gave him quite some edge, in the serve return battle, which is always a very good thing to analyze in this matchup, in this rivalry. So that aggressive mindset was very important in terms of, being able to go toe to toe, to play toe to toe against Sinner. And he proved that he can also beat Sinner on hard courts. You could see now 3-0 in this year. So even though it was an ATP 500, maybe not that important, when you paint the big picture of the year, it was that important for Carlos to prove to himself and to the public that he is able to beat Sinner on hard courts.
Yeah, so you already touched on like the many ways in which this was a very important match for Carlos. I think, yeah, everybody was like kind of looking at it in terms of like, okay, his form is just great in Beijing. He seems to be back, but this is the match when we will really be able to know. But was this also an important one for Yannick? I mean, given sort of how the rest of the year played out, the record he has against Alcaraz this year is kind of one of the only stains.
Yeah, no, and it's kind of a big talking point in terms of what's going to happen next year. We're discussing this third match of the rivalry during this year, but we have to remember Sinner hasn't beat Alcaraz like in 12, 13 months, and this was like the prime chance for him to do it, and he couldn't. So maybe that's something that will, I mean, considering Sinner's personality and the way he behaves on court, I don't think it's gonna, hold him back so much. But it's still there. It's still there, and it's a good thing for Alcaraz to get maybe that mental edge in terms of if they face each other into a Grand Slam semifinal or final. Maybe if they go to a fifth set, maybe Sinner will remember that he couldn't even beat him on hard courts at the end of the 2024 season. Maybe that's something that happens. But for Sinner, it was that important, as you're saying, because hey, the score is 3-0 in this year, and there's no chance for him to come back from that. At least this year, we have to wait for until the next month.
Yeah, I think it's maybe even gotten more important as the months pass, because like at the time we probably thought that this might not be their last match. Like they were
True.
on collision course
True.
in Shanghai, ATP finals. Of course, it seemed like that could be another one, Davis Cup if they met in the final. So yeah, I guess at the time it just didn't feel like that's going to be the final clash. They did play at the Six Kings Slam in Jeddah, and Jannik won that one. I don't think that's something
Yeah,
that's really going to change
agree.
his mindset here. I
Agree
think
with
you're
you.
also very right about this being different to Indian Wells. Beijing isn't like any super quick hard court. But still, in 2023, Jannik showed that he can just come out and just crush forehands at Carlos, and it's too much, basically, even though the first set was really close. And then, of course, Indian Wells still is a completely different surface, as you mentioned. So, yeah, it was a different challenge that Alcaraz had to sort of like face here. I actually was I'm kind of interested in this, that the hype about his form was so huge that he was actually priced as the
Yeah.
favorite here against Jannik, despite Jannik being on a 15-match win streak, which actually kind of tells you, I guess, that the matchup advantage was already pretty big for people at
Exactly.
the time.
I
I
think
think
if
in
you,
Mhm.
No, I think it has to do with the matchup, and it has to do with the previous matches. I guess only two samples, as so to say, during the year, and Alcaraz won in both. He was playing lights out, and Sinner, last match before the final was against Bu Yunchaokete. Alcaraz last match before the final was against Medvedev, so maybe that played into it. I think it was quite even because you could say that Alcaraz knows his way around Sinner, but in terms of surface, maybe coming off fresh from the US Open win was also something to take into consideration in terms of Sinner being the favorite. So I think it was quite even. I didn't have that impression before the match, like Alcaraz got this or Sinner got this. He's gonna get another win in Beijing after what happened last year. No, I think it was quite even. I think we were kind of primed and ready to see what we ended up watching. A great showdown between the two most dominant players of the season.
Yeah, I think personally I was kind of leaning Sinner beforehand, mostly based on that
Okay.
Beijing clash. And, in 2024, Indian Wells, like Carlos uses that slice very well and just manages to kind of outlast Jannik, even though it's a best of reset match. Then also Roland Garros, pretty much the same, but now it's like these super high moonball backhands that he breaks his rhythm with. These game plans weren't really going to be possible for him on a court like this. So for me, it was huge when I started watching that final. And I think I was on the watch along for this. I have no idea of whom. I think I was on the watch along for this. I have no idea of whom. I think I was on the watch along for this. I have no idea of whom. But with somebody anyway, I was watching this, and I remember just seeing the first three games, seeing how Carlos is just coming out and crushing his forehand the way he was against
Yes.
Medvedev, Khachanov, and pretty much everybody that week. Rikspor, I think, was like the craziest performance when he didn't drop a point on serve or something like that, or didn't drop a point on first serve. And I remember seeing the first three games, like, okay, look, this is a very different match already to what we've seen from them in 2024. Because like Indian Wells, Carlos' first set gets just blown off the court. Roland Garros, same
Yes.
thing. So here, like these first few games showed me that okay, he's ready to challenge Jannik here.
Yeah, I think that we ended up watching a match with quite some turns and twists that we'll probably, delve into this video. But the beginning was, as you said, quite different compared to other matches in this rivalry. I think it showed that Carlos was hungry to beat Jannik. He was hungry kind of to, reclaim that number one spot, not on the rankings, but in terms of people saying, okay, Sinner won the US Open, but hey, we got our boy now beating him. So he's kind of showing that he's like still the brass in the tour. And I think that, Sinner had kind of a slower start into the match, but we know Jannik. We know that he won't panic. Even if Alcaraz gets a 5-love lead, he will stay, resilient. He won't go away. He will just keep playing his game until maybe Alcaraz, has some doubts in terms of, attacking his forehand, has some doubts because Alcaraz went off, blazing guns, and he went like crazy in terms of the return as well. But Sinner kept, okay, let's focus. I'm going to keep playing my tennis until Alcaraz starts making some mistakes and making some unforced errors, which he did. And that's when the first set kind of leveled up.
Yeah, I think now we should probably get into this because the first set was like a bit of a steal. Second game of the match, Alcaraz has 3 breakpoints in a row already. Of course, he doesn't take them, but then he breaks and he's 5-3 up. He's serving for it. I actually didn't even remember that he also had a set point before the tiebreak.
Yes.
And
Yes.
he has 2 more set points in the actual tiebreak. So yeah, I mean, what started going wrong for Carlos when he finally had some opportunities to get the first set on the board against Jannik for the first time in ages, actually? Because I guess by that point it would be like 4 matches in a row that they played against each other where he loses the first set.
Yeah, yeah, and I think you could say that like Alcaraz was kind of, or at least I had the impression, I was under the impression that Alcaraz was the better player in the first set, but Jannik played the tight moments and the key moments much better than Carlos. And at the time, I remember people were, saying like, okay, this is what's gonna happen now in this rivalry. Alcaraz can blow Sinner off the court, but then Sinner is like rock solid, and he's now the guy that has confidence in terms of when you have to play the critical moments. Like people had forgotten what happened in Roland Garros and what happened in other Grand Slam matches between them. Spaniards tend to go a little bit crazy and tend to like, blow some steam after Alcaraz loses one set. And that's kind of what happened, just Sinner, his play in the end, is it has a little bit of more margin for error and less risks. So he's bound to, I don't know, get those critical moments or, win in those critical moments if Alcaraz is not like, feeling the ball as well as Jannik. And that's kind of what happened. And that first set, I would say that Carlos played it better, but that Jannik, proved that on the critical moments, he's a menace. But then I would also have to highlight how Carlos, and when we go into the second set, we can talk about it, how Carlos, kept steady, kept believing in himself, and used his serve as the key weapon to, still be there in the match, because Jannik had all the momentum going into the second set, and Alcaraz used his serve plus one combination to basically survive. And it allowed himself the chance to turn the tide, midway and then towards the end of the second set.
Yeah, I think what she said is, of course, very true. That like Jannik is more about percentage play and effectiveness, and it's kind of funny how even in these few points, like I'm watching the set points right now, like even in these few points, you can see all the areas in which he's improved over the past year. Like 5-6, 30-40, he goes to the net, and I mean, okay, it's not like the toughest volley ever, but it's still not something that generally Jannik has been a natural at playing in the forecourt. He does very well on it. Then there's the 6-4 deficit that he has to climb out of. He hits an ace. Obviously, the serve has also been major part of the work that they've done with Cahill and Vanozzi. And then 6-5, that's probably the point that was like very heavily discussed after this tiebreak, where Carlos hits the serve down the tee, but it's like not amazing placement. And it's the Jannik Sinner special, because the entire season he's hitting all these like high percentage, deep, effective returns. This one is even for a winner, which I guess normally when you're going like pretty close to the middle doesn't happen. But yeah, like he just completely steals that first set. I do agree about that. And it's not that he was like playing poorly or anything, but
Yeah,
yeah, that was
absolutely.
probably not what was going on generally in that rivalry at the time. It was mostly Alcaraz who kind of had to like come up with something and steal a
Yeah,
set at Roland Garros or in at Indian Wells.
it's amazing, as you said, how much has Sinner improved in terms of being confident in his abilities when the clutch time arrives, so to say. I do remember his match against Holger Rune in Monte Carlo 1.5 years ago. And I do remember people saying, like, Rune has that mental aura, in him. Sinner doesn't, Sinner doesn't have it. And, at that time, the people's perception were like, Sinner is gonna, like, Sinner's floor is much higher than Rune's, but Rune's peak is much higher than Sinner. Compare that Jannik to the one that showed up in the first set of the Beijing final, and you'll see the difference in his tennis, in his, as I said, confidence in his abilities. Kudos to Bagnozzi and Cahill because they also played a big role in transforming Jannik's. And also, it says a lot about Jannik's work ethic and his obsession about improving and kind of being a complete perfectionist in every single kind of aspect and area, in terms of tennis wise. So props to him. And he stole the set, couldn't win the match in the end, but he'll probably steal a lot of sets in his rivalry against Alcaraz due to that improvement in his tennis and in his mental aspect.
Yeah, very true. That's a match I remember very fondly too. Yeah, for Rune against Sinner, kind of
Great
similar,
match.
I guess, to
Yeah.
how Alcaraz was beating Sinner at some points this year. Just like
Yeah.
he got blown off the court the opening set, and then he just outlasts Jannik. But yeah, that sort of, let's say, ability to come up with wins like this against Sinner is definitely going away. It's not something that you can
Let's
do now.
not
I
go
mean, right
into
now
that.
you just can't beat him in any way, right? Unless he
Yeah.
gets injured or unless he's not fit. So that's another topic, I guess. Although here we are talking about a match where someone did beat Jannik, and in fact, wait, am I now talking? No, it's his last loss of the year, right?
Yes, it his
Yeah.
last loss of the year. Correct. Because he won Shanghai. He didn't play Paris-Bercy. He even won the 16 Slam and he won ATP finals. And so yeah, it's his last. It's his last loss of the year. Crazy to think that Jannik, since Canada, has only got one loss in, like, what's that, 4.5 months or something like that, probably.
29-1, I think, right? Because it was
That's
15
amazing.
before this final, 4
Yeah.
at Cincinnati because there was a walkover there, 7 US Open, 4 here, and then 6 plus 5 plus 3. So yeah, 29-1 since losing to Rublev in Montreal, and of course he was pretty injured there. So yeah, that is unbelievable, and that actually also adds to the legacy of this match.
Yeah.
And I think what's kind of forgotten about this, I'm not saying I did forget about this, but I think in the grand scheme of things, people don't really remember that, like, in the second set, it just looked like this might be not an easy straight set win for Jannik, but like the second set had the marks of this potentially being like another one of these where he takes the first set, which is tightly contested, kind of similar like Beijing 2023, and he was like really looking in control for about half of it in the second set.
I think the general feeling we had in our stream was Sinner getting the win, 7-6, 6-4.
Oh, so
Seven
you were
six six
also
four.
doing a watch
Yeah,
along on
well,
this, but I put to the break. That's funny because I
yes.
was doing that on Talking Tennis,
I,
and I think exactly the same feeling was me and whoever I did this with.
it was that feeling, you thought, like, is Sinner gonna really give this set away? Because we have been talking about Jannik Sinner, how he's so resilient, he's rock solid mentally. He doesn't usually, like, let go of these kind of chances. But then again, Alcaraz came up with the goods. He was solid enough with his serve to. I don't think he got broken in the second set. Damian, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but he was
Alcaraz?
kind of Alcaraz,
No,
yes.
no, 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 no,
So
no.
he was able to regain and regroup himself, and especially, as I was saying, his serve was so good in the second set. You wouldn't think about Alcaraz, you wouldn't think like a serve bot, or you wouldn't think about someone that has serve as his main weapon. But in this second set, it was what kept him alive, kept him afloat, and gave him the chance and enabled him to win short rallies, short points, while he was kind of, regrouping mentally. And he was able to kind of, that momentum that Sinner had going into the second set, it was kind of stopped. We went to a like 50-50 chance in terms of the second set, and he again had that kind of peak game where he got the break and ended up kind of stealing the second set. I felt like Sinner stole the first set and Alcaraz stole the second set. That was my impression during the match. That was my belief. And again, it shows how good this kid is. It shows how good Carlos is, because we tend to, underestimate his mental side, because Sinner is so good at it, because Sinner is so consistent, because Sinner is so, you know, he doesn't give you any chance. He doesn't give you any room for improvement during a match. But Carlos is equally as good in terms of playing those tense moments. And he showed it in the second set. He, as I said, played a lot of short points. I remember like his serve was stellar. His serve was phenomenal. And that enabled him to turn the tides, win the second set, and go like, completely blank canvas into the third one.
Yeah, I think what you're saying about the serve, I mean, of course, over the years, this has been also like heavily discussed that like, yeah, the pace on the Alcaraz serve is pretty elite. Like there's no issue with that. It's just that the spot serving is kind of just like, one day it's amazing, one day it's not. Here, at least in the second set, definitely some amazing moments. I think we have to talk about this like huge game at 3-4 down when
Yes.
these points aren't going to be in the highlights, and I didn't rewatch the entire match. But I think that was when like he was serving on the outside, these aces out wide time and time again, and that like really kept him in this. And you just mentioned that you also had the same feeling that okay, like Jannik can just win this 7-6, 6-3 or 7-6, 6-4. Like that was the game when that probably happens. Exactly. If Alcaraz gets broken. If Alcaraz gets broken, we're not talking about this match right now. We're talking about something different for the number one on the list.
True that. No, yeah, and was a very important game. And again, it shows just how good Alcaraz can be mentally. And I mean, he is that good. He just, Sinner had such an amazing season that we tend to forget about that. But Alcaraz has proved himself time to time again that he is able to escape from some very difficult situations. And something that people love is that he is able to produce some quality tennis. He's not just grinding and hustling and making the other player like kind of lose his mind in these tense moments. He's just winning those points by playing some amazing, spectacular shots. That's something that people really love about him. He did it in the second set against Jannik. And yeah, when Carlos won that game, it was like a relief to him. And it was one of the turning points, if not the turning point of this match.
Yeah, I mean, it happens in the second set, and the third is pretty crazy too. But to me, this is also kind of where the match was won. It is a bit controversial because, especially in the tiebreak later on, there's gonna be a point that is probably even more important. But like,
it makes sense because if he doesn't win this game, there's no tiebreak, there's no turning point in the tiebreak, so it does make sense.
I guess you can look at it that way too. That like, yeah, this is where he saves the match. Maybe this is not where he wins it, but this is where he saves it. And there's still a bit more of with Alcaraz, like his disdain for percentage play is kind of funny, and it's very fun to watch as well. And there is a bit of that like carelessness in this game too. I think he can close it out like 10 points earlier, but he gets loved by Jannik because his volley isn't that good. But anyway, he manages to hold. Jannik, of course, gets broken in the next game after like sending a forehand wide. And we should probably right now arrive in the deciding set. And right now we are kind of in a position where after an early break for a while, we just think that, okay, so this is now Alcaraz's time to shine. He's got this now. Like by the beginning of the third set, everybody's just thinking, okay, so this is now a 6-3 or 6-4 for Alcaraz. He's too good. Congrats. But no.
How good are these guys, that they keep fooling us within this kind of matches. And I have to remind you that Alcaraz had 2 break points to go into a double break lead in the third set. I think he had 2 break points to go into a 5-2 lead, and then serve for the match. I don't know if he had to serve for the match, but he had 2 break points to go into double lead. Then again, we talked about how good is Alcaraz in these kind of tough moments, clutch moments. How good is Jannik Sinner? Here we have another example of his improvements and his evolution within the mental game during this year. He was able to fend off these couple of break points, got the hold serve, and then everything changed once again. Sinner kind of was there mentally. He was there. He wasn't gonna let Alcaraz win easily this match, and he proved it. Alcaraz had like a little bit of a shocker. It wasn't like a shocker in that game when he got broken. It wasn't a shocker, but he's prone to making these kind of unforced errors that give open the door a little bit to the other player. And then we arrived. I would say that in terms of game wise and in terms of quality, I would say that this was the best set of the match. Also, we'll go into that, but because of what happened in tiebreak, which deserves a chapter by itself, but I think it was the best set of the match. It was highly enjoyable, the back and forth, the twists, again, Alcaraz had the break, but once Sinner saved those couple of break points, I did have the feeling of saying he's gonna come back. He's gonna just as it happened during the second set where Alcaraz saved multiple situations where he was like on the verge of losing the match. Sinner saved that situation where he was on the verge of losing the match. So you could sense that we had a long set in coming, and indeed we had it. And luckily for us, because the last stretch of the match was one of the best stretches of tennis of the whole season, if not the best.
Yeah, you were right to remind me about the 2 breakpoints because I did forget about it.
No, I had to read an article about the final before. Because I'm sorry, I did a little bit of homework. Damien, sorry.
That's completely fair. I mean, I did some homework too, which was watching the highlights, but that game was not included in them. However, there was something from that game when Carlos gets broken at 4-3, and would it be fair to say that it's like one of his worst games of the match? Kind of just like completely out of nowhere at the time, because for 10 games in a row, he's the better player.
You could say it was a shocker, right?
Yeah. At the time, I definitely just, I don't know. It seemed like he has all the momentum. He's so clear about what he's trying to do on the court.
No, I didn't want to use that word while I was speaking. I was like, maybe shocker is a bit too harsh, but it was it was an off game. Let's say it was an off game, especially considering what had been going on throughout the third set.
And with that, of course, we arrive. Actually, he is now the one kind of under pressure, right? Because we've got the 5-4, 6-5 leads for Jannik. So, I mean, at the time, we already know that we're watching something crazy. We already know that we're watching something at the level of Cincinnati from last year, at the level of the Zverev Hamburg final, which we also included in our top 5. I think it's going to be like number 3 or something like that. So it's going over 3 hours. It's like the longest match in tournament history or whatever. We know we're watching something crazy. But yeah, just before we get to the tiebreak, anything about these last few games before the breaker?
We were in for a treat. That's what we were thinking. While we were doing this streaming. Who would you say that was the favorite leading up to the tiebreak? That is a good question. Like,
wasn't Jannik on like a crazy tiebreak streak or something like that as well?
True, but then you have to go into the rivalry and consider that Alcaraz had won the last matches, and then if you had to like lean in terms of mental edge within that rivalry, you would say maybe Alcaraz. So it was a good question to ask. Like, who would you have bet before? Who would you have put your money on before that tiebreak? It's a tough question, and when Sinner got to a 3-0 lead in the tiebreak, you could say, I mean, he's the one that is on fire right now. He's the one that is riding that wild win streak after winning the US Open in Cincinnati. Hey, it wasn't the end of the match. Certainly, it wasn't the end of the match. And that's what makes the end so special as well.
Yeah, if my quick counting is correct, I think Jannik would have been on an 18-1 tiebreak run since Halle going into
Wow.
that one. So I'm pretty sure that on the stream this was the record we were kind of like constantly mentioning. I don't think we were actually
Okay.
talking about Carlos having like some sort of a mental edge because of the previous two matches. I think mostly we were just talking about that. But that was
But then
kind of
again,
like the hype stats.
Alcaraz also has like an incredibly high tiebreak wins percentage. He's one of the
Yeah,
best
and
in the
we've set
ATP
record as
tour.
well. I know this isn't 5 sets, but that also kind of applies,
Yeah,
right?
true, true,
Yeah.
true, true. Like in terms of closing long, tight matches out, he's kind of a specialist as well. Yeah.
And then the breaker comes. It's like well over 3 hours by then. And Jannik races to a 3-0 lead. At that point, Alcaraz is looking kind of out of it. I think it's also 2 mini breaks, right?
Yeah, and it's the time that he goes to his chair and changes his shoes, right? So
Yeah,
it
I
was
don't
kind
remember
of,
which point exactly, but I guess it was at 3-0. Yeah.
yeah, it was a 3-0. Yeah, I do
Okay.
remember because it was like kind of a funny moment, then watching everyone saying, he did it on purpose to break Jannik's rhythm, and they were also comparing it to Jannik's post puke sinner. So we had Jannik post puke sinner the year before, and then we had Carlos post shoe change in Beijing. So it was kind of funny because it was at the very same stadium. And then again, I mean, I'm not gonna hold back in saying that Alcaraz stretch of 7 points in a row was one of the most fascinating displays of tennis I've ever seen in my lifetime. And honestly, I don't feel like I'm overreacting. At the moment, I thought I was witnessing something really special, like really, really special, something that only generational players are able to produce. That was my belief at that time. I'm still firmly on that bandwagon.
Yeah, I think when I was talking about this huge game at 3-4 in the second set earlier, I mentioned that later on in the tiebreak, there's another point that kind of turns it around. That's the
Yes.
one I was talking about was the fifth in this tiebreak. So Alcaraz is in at the net. Once again, he gets lobbed by Jannik, but he manages to stay in the point. It's like going back to neutral again. And then, of course, there's that net exchange where like he just sends Jannik flying. There's a shot he has to come up to. It's actually similar to the set point recently at the ATP finals against Zverev when I was watching that today, because
Yeah.
the one that he lost in the first set tiebreak, because people then
He
kept
went.
saying that like he should have volleyed it rather than just straight up went for some sort of a weird volley. Here, I think he does take it on a half volley. And of course, I'm still amazed that Jannik actually recovers from that corner of the
Yes.
court and
Yes.
manages to track it down. Then I am amazed, I guess, the other way that Carlos still is like, well, he still believes that Jannik can catch this ball and is ready to cut it
He
off.
knows. He knows. He knows that the point is not over. He has played Sinner too many times now, and he knows that this guy he's not tiring himself. He's gonna be able to. If he has to run into the outer courts to get back those kind of shots, he will run into the outer courts. No worries about that. So yeah, I mean, I I don't particularly think that there was like a one turning point in terms of how the tiebreak unfolded. I think it was more of Alcaraz just catching fire. This point was kind of the realization of that. Like he definitely is catching fire. But then again, I don't remember like like all the points were kind of either winners or like forced errors by Jannik. Maybe there was like the odd unforced error by Jannik, but honestly, if my memory serves right, he was like winning points at the wheel, and I think if I don't remember, if I'm not mistaken, I think he closes the match out with also another winner. So that was an amazing tiebreak, man. That point was the highlight of the tiebreak, so to say. But then again, all the tiebreak was full of like serve plus one winners, forehand winners. Jannik's maybe forced error by trying to retrieve one amazing ball by Alcaraz. It was just like that.
Yeah, usually it's tough to say whether a ball is a winner or not, but actually that match point, I mean, Jannik gets his racket on his
Yeah.
corner, but I would say I would probably classify it as a winner. Like it's not
I
a
would.
forced error. It's not
I
a
would as
forced
well.
error.
I would as well, my
I
friend.
think
I would
this,
as well.
generally speaking, goes into the winner category, but it's pretty tricky there because he does get his racket on it. It's not like a clean winner, if you may. I know there's
Yeah,
also
yeah.
discussions
But
whether the term even makes sense. Maybe in this case it does because it's not a clean winner, but it is a winner, and it is more like incredible aggressive play over the course of the tiebreak from Carlos on the 7 points. I mean, going down to mini breaks there, definitely like no one at that stage thought that this was possible to win 7 points against Sinner at the time. And he gets this much done. It's obviously, I mean, at this point, everybody is already talking about it being the best match of the year, especially as on the ATP side, at Grand Slams, especially this year, has not been maybe the richest in terms of
I
tennis
agree.
classics. So
I
this
agree.
one stood out even more. And let's talk about some sort of like more general things. So like, where did this take them? Because we mentioned that Alcaraz, like, this was so important for him to get this one after the US Open and Cincinnati disappointment, and kind of just like maintain that strong position over Jannik. It didn't really like catapult him into any amazing achievements for the rest of 2024. But I guess now that we're looking back at it, like, it basically sort of like ensures us that, well, he's in a good position to begin next year, because maybe without this win we would be a little bit more worried.
Yeah, it lays a blueprint on how to beat Yannick Sinner on a medium-paced hardcourt, and that's enough of a win itself for Carlos. I think even if it didn't translate into a great last stretch of the season, and we honestly were hyped and we thought that he was gonna do much better than in 2023, he didn't. Still the season was a tad too long for him, and it's something that he will have to. And I do remember talking about this when we did the Carlos Aniga show at the end of last year, and that he needed to learn how to properly manage an 11-month season. And Carlos, I think he once again felt a little bit short. He wasn't that good again in terms of managing the season, and Jannik was really good. I think Jannik is one of the best players in terms of managing a 12-month season, and choosing how and when to picking at the right time. But then again, even though it didn't translate, as I was saying, into a great last stretch of the season, I would still say that it was a very important match for Alcaraz, because once again, even in Yannick's best year, even if we know that he's the number one player in the world, that he was the best player of the season, even in that kind of season where Alcaraz showed himself to be a little bit, he wasn't that consistent, still 3-0, didn't lose to Jannik, beat him on his preferred surface. So that is something that gives you hell of a confidence leading into any match in which he might face Sinner, be at the Australian Open, be at the US Open, where the conditions are the most similar to Beijing within the Grand Slam, alongside the Grand Slam. So maybe we could not see, or we can't see the significance of this match right now, but I think we might see the significance of that match maybe at some point during this 2025 season.
Yeah, I mean, it's clear that it didn't derail Yannick all that much for now,
Ah,
but certainly
he
if
is
we
a
if
rock
we
solid
have
man.
another matchup between them, this is going to be discussed as well. Hopefully, we finally get them playing in the Grand Slam final, because it's pretty crazy that this never happened this year, considering they both won 2 each. I was doing this like table for an article with where Yannick's achievements and Carlos's achievements in 2024, kind of like comparison, and
Yeah.
there wasn't that much, because I was bolding out the the achievement that was better, and there was not that much that I could bold next to Carlos, because I put like grass court win rate, clay court win rate, hard court win rate, and Yannick is better at everything. ATP 500 titles, ATP 1000 titles, but there were two things. I think,
Okay.
I mean, three
Head to
things.
head.
Sorry. Yeah, one of them was the head-to-head. Second was Olympics, and the third one was they had both bolded, 2 slams each. So that kind of tells you that it's not a comparison really. Yannick has had the better season,
No, he
by a
had the better.
country mile.
Yes.
But this is the one thing that Carlos had over him, and I think, mentally, this is quite important for sure. Where do you think this stands, sort of in the in the history of the rivalry? I think they've played like 10 times by now. Of course, we do include the challenger match that they played in
Of
2019.
course.
I don't have to convince Carlos of that. Definitely not. Neither Alcaraz nor Navarro. Both of them will be very happy to see it in the head-to-head. So it's now 7-4, right? With that one, actually, yeah. I
Wow.
actually ended up not.
Including it at first, yeah.
Yeah, at first I actually didn't end up including
No,
it
but
because I see
7-4.
it all the time. But anyway, 7-4. And where do you think this stands in the history of the rivalry? I mean, they've had so many good matches against each other. Is it just as good, sort of, as the US Open quarterfinal in 2022? Is it the
Okay,
second best match that they've played against each other?
so you mean the comparison in terms of quality, right?
Yeah, just that.
I think it's, I mean, the drama and the stakes of a Grand Slam, and considering it was a very high quality match as well, it wasn't like a very inconsistent match such as the one that we had in Roland Garros this season. It can be compared. I think it's still one step behind that US Open match. But then again, I'm looking at the other matches, and it's probably tied at the second place with the Miami Open semifinal last year. But then again, the Miami Open semifinal last year didn't feature such a good first set, compared to this one. It was much more lopsided for Jannik. So yeah, I would maybe, next to that Miami match, because also obviously, the stakes are higher also in a Master 1000, but I think it's just the US Open match that is better than this one in terms of quality, in terms of also drama, because of that last stretch of the match, and because it was a very high quality match throughout the whole match. Maybe some parts of the second wasn't that, it was maybe too much serve oriented. If we look at all the matches between Jannik and Carlos, maybe the second set was a little bit too serve oriented. But then again, first set was such a joy, such a treat to watch. So I would maybe put it not tied. Maybe let's give a slight edge to this match in the second place. Better than the Miami match, but then again, behind that, the US Open quarterfinal you were referring to.
Yeah, I think that's fair. It should definitely be ahead of Miami for me, but at the same time, US Open, I'm a sucker for best of 5 hours, match point save.
It was
Yeah,
epic.
it's going to be tough to beat them. Yeah. But I mean, you still called that Roland Garros semifinal a very inconsistent match, which I don't disagree with at all. But the match still made our top 5 of the year, and in fact, I don't think it's like number 5. I think it's.
I don't think it's. I
3 or 4.
Well, if you're asking me where I
you're not,
rank,
you wouldn't agree with that.
I put it. I also did a ranking for the website, and I put it. Let me check it because it was like 7th or 8th. I think I had to put it because
that's still top 10. Okay, when you said you
yeah.
wouldn't put it in the top 5, I was thinking maybe you, I don't know, just should.
You look at the quality. Maybe it's not top 10 quality, but I think the 5th set was a good 5th set. But then again, before that 5th set, too up and down for me. And because we know these guys can produce so much better. But then again, the stakes, the significance, the drama, the emotion, those are also some arguments you could make to sneak it into the top 10. I sneaked it into the top 10. I'm not going to say I'm like certain this is a top 10 match, but I kind of had to sneak it in because of its significance. In terms of quality, it's not a top 10 match at all. But when I try to evaluate all these matches and make a top, I not only look at quality, I try to look at other stuff as well. So that's why I would rank it maybe in 8th match of the season. But for me, definitely not top 5. I even had Fils against Humbert in the Tokyo final in the top 5 before that match. So
that's fine. I mean, it would have been in our top 10 when we were doing the narrowing down the list. Fils Humbert, basically, we kind of eliminated it mostly based on the fact that Fils and Zverev was going to be higher up. So, it probably shouldn't really be a factor, like that there are two matches that are so similar.
It's like it's too much to have 2 Fils ATP 500 finals in the top 5. I completely understand.
So that was our way of thinking, and but Fils Humbert also would have made the top 10. But all in all, like, this kind of just shows that this is very much obviously the rivalry right now, and best rivalry you have on the tour, because we have so many problems with that Roland Garros match. Like, we just leave it even right after the fact. No one is like, oh, this was so incredible, but we're just thinking, okay, so for a set Alcaraz was like unable to play. Then Sinner isn't able to play. Both of them were injured going into the event, and they were just like at
Yeah.
80% or something like that. They still pretty much like that much decided the Roland Garros title. A little disrespectful to Zverev, but let's say that's actually the case. So yeah, it just shows you that this is where things are at right now in men's tennis. And anytime Alcaraz and Sinner are going to play, even if before this year it was obvious that this is the highlight match and you have to watch this, it's only getting stronger.
And it shows that we are sometimes a little bit picky with these two guys, and we have the expectations are so high. We expect such a high quality match that when you have a match that kind of drops a little bit in terms of quality, you are thinking, nah, this can be like a top 10, this can be like a top 5, because we know how good these guys are, and we're expecting such a high level contest. So it's kind of a compliment, a hidden compliment, to guys. So I think that's fine. They will be fine. They won't be like they won't say, oh fuck, these guys didn't include that match into the top 5. I'm not gonna watch talking tennis anymore. Nah, I think they should be fine with your and our rank.
Yeah, I think even like I'm not sure how serious he would have been about this, like how much he would have been pushing for it. But I think John even wanted to like have as a maybe the Indian Wells match at first, which like yeah, not really. But again, it just shows you how high the expectations are and like how much every
Absolutely.
single clash between Sinner and Alcaraz just like is just so significant at the moment. And speaking of that, I think maybe the last thing that I want to talk about, like after the match, there were a few controversial comments. I don't remember who it was right now, but it was like some former players basically coming
Uh-huh.
out and saying that this is the best tennis that they've ever seen. Both me and you, we've been like,
Was it
well, not
Villander?
I don't remember, and that's my problem. I was trying to look it up, but I can't. Yeah, apparently it is Vilan that our producer is suggesting. So basically, yes. So that's what I want to talk about, because both me and you, we like grew up as tennis fans in the Big Three era, and these three guys, like they're the best in history, best of all time, unless someone wants to make the case for like Rod Laver or something. Anyway, let's say we've had three players which are in the top 5 in history. So that's pretty crazy. And then these two guys show up, and
Hmm.
suddenly we have opinions like this. And like, is it too much? Or is it justified? Is it justified because the intensity, the speed at which they're playing, is just incomparable even to what Federer, Nadal, and Djokovic were doing?
I think the peak level might hold the comparison, peak level of both Alcaraz and Sinner, but we do not have to rush it, and we do not have to run, because they haven't kind of produced it consistently during a 5-set match. Okay, the US Open was kind of a great showing. It was a great match. But then you had matches like that in the Djokovic Nadal rivalry, Djokovic Federer rivalry, Nadal Federer rivalry. Like you had every one of two matches was like that. And Alcaraz and Sinner, their matches had produced way more ups and downs than the ones within the Big Three rivalry. I think we have stumbled upon two generational players, two players that could very well end up their careers in the top 10, like historical top 10. I think that's fair to say. I mean, bearing any like huge injury, bearing any uh, court appeals, and what's going to happen to Sinner on February. Bearing all of that, I think we have two players that they have the ability, the potential to become like true greats of the game, but it's still too early to compare them to Djokovic and Federer. They can produce the shot speed, the shot making. They can produce it, can be at that level, but those guys, Djokovic, Federer, and Rafa, did it every single tournament, every single day. You could have like like 13 years ago, you had Djokovic and Rafa playing classics back to back to back to back to back. We still haven't had that with Sinner and Alcaraz. So until we have that, it's too early to make those grandiose statements such as the Villander one.
Yeah, Mats Wilander likes to make these sort of controversial, grandiose
He's a
statements.
sucker
Definitely.
for this kind of leave the moment statements.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, on some level, I agree with him. Like, definitely in terms of like just like sheer intensity of play, it's probably the highest we've ever seen. But that's just how tennis evolves. Like obviously a match between, I don't know, Roger Federer and Leighton Hewitt in 2005, it's different. It's a different game by now. I've
Yeah,
seen some very interesting stats recently from PTPA actually, who were simply like claiming that in 2015 playing two sets is now, sorry, the other way around, playing two sets is now like in 2015 as if you played like
3 sets. Yeah,
3.5 or
yeah.
something like that. So yeah, it like the intensity is just incomparable. And maybe it's not really a sign of Sinner and Alcaraz being better than Djokovic, Nadal,
Just different.
Federer, or Borg or McEnroe. It's just different. It's just how the game evolves. And yeah, I don't think we have to rush into these sort of
And
statements.
hey,
Definitely.
let's remember something. Let's remember something. We are comparing Sinner and Alcaraz sheer intensity, and as you said, and which I mostly agree. I wouldn't maybe go as far as to say that this is like the, in terms of sheer intensity, this is the best
Okay.
we have seen. I wouldn't go as far as to say that. I do remember some Djokovic and Nadal matches which could very well top that list, but let's remember that Novak Djokovic is still there and was able to beat Alcaraz and Sinner in the most important matches up to the season. This season he played Sinner in the Australian Open. He was Novak Djokovic. Sinner completely dismantled him. Fair enough, but up like 1 year ago he was playing, back and forth with this guy, this Alcaraz guy that has the sheer intensity, and he was beating him in Cincinnati, and he beat him in the Olympics this year. So he's still able to match that level that Alcaraz and Sinner are producing. For how long? We're gonna find out this year. If it doesn't hold up to them, we can say that Alcaraz and Sinner are on another level. But up to like 1 year ago, Novak Djokovic, player from another era, was still matching these guys that Villander are claiming are playing the best tennis of that we've ever seen. So Mats, come on, take one tape of a match in 2023, watch it again, rewind yourself, take some beers, before you make those statements. Please, Mats Villander, thank you very much.
Yeah, I mean, my example of like Federer Hewitt 2005, like that was a different era.
Oh, of
But
course.
like Federer 2019, he almost won Wimbledon.
What?
Rafa won Roland Garros 2 years ago. So it's definitely not like this is just something that
Exactly.
ended. They
Fixated.
were able
Yeah.
to adapt, and they aren't as far from these guys. Definitely not. Probably also worth, however, remembering that Sinner and Alcaraz, they might not be in their final forms yet.
Of
Maybe
course.
especially Carlos. 2022 US Open, as you said, phenomenal match. But like if we think of where their games were at the time, like yeah, it's night and day too. So they
Absolutely.
might still have more to show. But for now, Mats Wilander, I mean, you got your sort of like you got the controversy, you got the reach you wanted.
We like the engagement you are trying
Yeah.
to produce. We know you're like the PUBG of Eurosport, Mats Villander. We get it. We get it. It's okay, but
You did well in terms of, it was a success. You created the engagement. But were you
you
right? Let's give it a bit more time. Anyway, phenomenal match. Number one for sure. I think from basically from the moment I watched it, I knew that it was gonna be number one. And it would be so hard to top it. Even myself, a fan of, let's say, the less appreciated matches, I have to agree. I have to just say that this is clearly the best one of the season. I think on Twitter a couple of days ago I said that is followed by Fils and Zverev in Hamburg. But to be honest, I only did it to kind of just still give that match some spotlight. It's not that close. This was definitely the best one we've had in 2024.
So wait, we're not gonna put now like Fonseca Landalus in the Lyon Challenger as the honorary first pick.
I mean, this
I
was
thought-
on the ATP tour,
I thought
but
we're gonna like do now the proper top one breakdown, with Fonseca Andaluz, Tomic, Galarnet. That's what I
Habib
was waiting for.
Ugo Carabelli, the
Habiba
penultimate of the track this
Carabelli.
season. Yeah, I'm gonna be doing that list at some point in the off season. I haven't I haven't went through all the draws yet. Haven't actually listed it. However, I can with full certainty tell you that Fonseca Andaluce will be in my top 10. Will it be my
Let's
top
go.
one? Not sure yet.
Nah, maybe not. Maybe not.
I think this one will be in my top 10, and I'm pretty sure that Habib Ugo Harabelli will also be in my top 10. However, well, these are November matches, so that's why I remember them the best. So it's possible that when I go to January, February, I will find something that I don't remember at the moment. It's 207 events on the ATP Challenger Tour. But anyway, the time for this discussion will come at some point. For now, what we can say, number one this year for sure. I'm very glad that it took this place. I don't think it's particularly controversial. Some people try to say the Olympics. We will have it high on the list, or actually by the time you're listening to this episode, it's probably already out. And I hope that with Carlos, we did this much justice.
Hope so. We had Carlos Alcaraz, we had Carlos, myself. You can't really compare them, but I think they will appreciate like the I don't know how to say it, like the lower level Carlos. We are like challenger guys, so I'm like the lower level Carlos. They will appreciate it for sure.
You're a challenger, Carlos Alcaraz.
Yeah,
Okay.
for sure. I'm good with that. I'm good with
You
that.
couldn't do what Carlos does, what Carlos Alcaraz does, right? I mean, you wouldn't be able to play at the same sort of intensity. But can Carlos Alcaraz do the things that
Grind
Carlos
down like
Alcaraz
me?
does?
I don't think so.
Could Carlos Alcaraz interview the tournament director of the Bratislava Challenger or Martin Kližan at the Bratislava Challenger? I don't know.
Martin Kližan is a good one. We're talking about someone who beat Rafael Nadal at Wimbledon. Carlos Alcaraz hasn't done that.
Exactly. And the producer has joined for
He didn't
probably
beat
just to
sorry,
laugh at
he,
his own joke, I
he
guess.
took a set.
Yeah.
He took
The
a set
Carlos
of Rafa. He beat him in Beijing. Sorry, we were talking Beijing, so it makes sense to mention that. Yeah, well, the people, John, they haven't watched like a proper, three-set match between you and me. The thing we played was like UTS, it was a UTS, and I don't like UTS. I like proper matches, so
Yeah,
we
of
owe
course.
ourselves that proper match,
Ghosty will be fuming over the last minute of this episode now because he loves UTS and Laver Cup, and
Really?
he's basically telling us that we are too much of traditionalists.
Traditionalist,
sorry.
Eurocentric as well.
I do remember those comments, but
Yeah.
he's the man. He's the man. I enjoyed those comments, so keep
He
them coming.
He joined your Punto de Break a couple of times, or a few times.
Yeah. He was, leaving some gems in the chat. Yes.
And
I do
does he
remember.
write in English or in Spanish? Or both?
Kind of a weird mix, let's say.
Yeah.
Let's say.
Yeah. He knows the muchachos and all
Right?
that sort of thing.
yeah, for sure. He was watching the Forlan match as well with Federer.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
All right. Well, just joined for the last couple of minutes because I thought it was very entertaining, but also want to highlight my joke from there about Carlos not hitting too many winners in his career. Carlos, no weapons, Navarro, as I sort of...
Yeah, it's like a less talked version of Ruben Ramirez Hidalgo, and I'm fine with that. I'm fine with that,
You were talking earlier a couple of minutes ago in the show about the level of Sinner and Alcaraz or something, and I wanted to remind you of a guy you brought up, Carlos, during the Nadal episode, but I can't. It was like the world number 500, and I had to Google who it was and check their level. I'll tell you when you said
Govit Nanda.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Govind Nanda.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember. It was poor Govind Nanda.
Because it was like you were saying, listen, Djokovic dealt with it very well, but it is Djokovic. It's not like Govind Nanda.
Yeah, I should have add another like pun in this episode as well. He's Carlos Alcaraz. He's not like, I don't know, Andrei Kuznetsov, but it's well anyway. It's good.
Yeah. All right, cool. I'm going to click end recording. We've actually If you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell so you don't miss out on all things tennis.